The turn of the 20th century was a time of great change, promise, and excitement. New inventions were revolutionizing the lives of ordinary people. New ideas were changing the way they thought about the world. At the same time, political tensions were high amongst the traditional powers, and nationalism was at its peak. In the midst of this excitement and turmoil, art, music, and literature were being transformed. Mallarmé and the Symbolists, Schoenberg and the Expressionists, Picasso and the Cubists. These artists and their movements were breaking aesthetic boundaries that had existed for centuries. The Russian composer Alexander Scriabin, one of the great innovators of Western classical music, was born in 1872. He was educated at the Moscow Conservatory, where he became well-versed in the tonal tradition. As he immersed himself in the musical trends of his time, however, he began to experiment with new compositional techniques. Scriabin's early experiments with traditional harmonies were twofold. First, traditional chords were made more complex through the addition of sevenths, ninths, 11ths, and 13ths. And second, these same chords were altered chromatically. For example, a C dominant seventh chord can be extended to include D, F, and A, creating a dominant 13th chord. On the other hand, this C dominant seventh chord can be chromatically altered, as when the G becomes G flat. Triadic extension and chromatic alteration can also be combined, as in the dominant flat 9 chord. These chord extensions and chromatic alterations open a wider range of possibilities for chord progressions. Taking the C dominant 7th flat 5 chord and reordering the note so that G flat is first instead of C creates a French augmented 6th chord in the key of B flat. Putting these two chords, the C dominant 7th flat 5 and the French augmented 6th chord in B flat, next to each other in a chord progression allows for a modulation from the key of F to the key of B flat by way of these two chords. As Scriabin abandoned tonal resolution in his later works, the techniques of triadic extension and chromatic alteration began to take on a life of their own. This can be seen first of all in the unaltered dominant 13th chord. Ordering the notes of a C dominant 13th chord in scale form creates a complete C mixolydian scale. In this form, it is clear that the dominant 13th chord includes every note of the diatonic scale, allowing each note in the diatonic scale to act harmonically as well as melodically. There are no longer any non-chord tones in the diatonic scale because all of them are included in the dominant 13th chord. If the dominant 13th chord is chromatically altered, non-diatonic scales become possible as well. Lowering the 5th, removing the 11th, and lowering the 13th, for example, creates a chord which, when ordered as a scale, is a complete whole tone scale. Taking the same dominant 13th chord and lowering the 9th and raising the 11th creates a chord that contains 7 of the 8 notes in the 0, 1, 3 octatonic scale. The octatonic scale that begins with a half step followed by a whole step. Raising only the 11th in the dominant 13th chord creates a chord that contains the 7 notes of a scale, often referred to as the acoustic scale. Even though Scriabin's complex and chromatic harmonies could include as many as 7 notes, non-chord tones were still possible. In a dominant 13th chord with root C, for example, each of the notes can have chromatic non-chord tones attached to them as upper or lower neighbors or passing tones. The 9th of the chord, D, might have a lower neighbor C sharp, or a melodic movement from E to D might have a passing tone of E flat. Non-diatonic chords can have non-chord tones attached to the chord tones as well. In the 6-note whole tone chord, for example, A flat might have a lower neighbor G, or a melodic movement from B flat to A flat might have a passing tone of B double flat. As long as the distinction between chord tones and non-chord tones existed, non-chord tones as dissonances needed to resolve to chord tones. In his 7th sonata, Scriabin created a system in which this necessity was removed. Through interactions between complex harmonies based on chromatic alterations of the dominant 13th chord, a sense of harmonic and melodic motion, as well as chromatic inflection, was created. Because all notes fell within these complex harmonies, the inequality between chord tones and non-chord tones was done away with altogether. All notes became equals. The interactions in Scriabin system are of two types. The first is the transposition of the octatonic triad, and the second is the oscillation between the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad. The primary octatonic triad of the 7th sonata is a dominant 7th chord with lowered 9th, raised 11th, and natural 13th. These pitches taken together are 7 of the 8 notes in the 0-1-3 octatonic scale. In a C octatonic triad, the only note required to complete the entire octatonic scale is D sharp. This complete octatonic scale, like any octatonic scale, retains all of its pitch classes when transposed by minor third, tritone, or major sixth. Because the octatonic triad is a subset of the octatonic scale, most of the pitch classes, 6 of the 7, are retained when this octatonic triad is transposed by minor third, tritone, or major sixth. For example, the C and E flat octatonic triads, when enharmonic spellings are accounted for, share 6 pitch classes. The F sharp is unique to the C triad, and the E flat is unique to the E flat triad. Because of these pitch class similarities, smooth harmonic motion is created when an octatonic triad is transposed by minor third, tritone, or major sixth to another octatonic triad that shares the same octatonic superset. Even though transpositions of the octatonic triad by minor third, tritone, and major sixth yield the highest number of common tones from one chord to the next, these are not the only intervals by which the octatonic triad is transposed in the 7th sonata. Other intervals are common as well. When the octatonic triad is transposed to another octatonic triad that does not share the same octatonic superset, only 3 pitch classes are retained instead of 6. The opening 10 measures of the sonata are based on the transposition principle. The harmony of the first 2 measures is the C octatonic triad, though the 5th of the chord, G, is absent. The next 2 measures transpose this triad by minor sixth to A flat, though the 3rd, C, and the 5th, E flat, are both missing from the chord. Typically, 1 or more notes of the triad will be missing at any time, as seen here. Still, it is useful when measuring the number of common tones from one octatonic triad to another to base this figure on the complete 7-note triad. From the opening C octatonic triad to the subsequent A flat octatonic triad, therefore, there are 3 common tones. As measure 4 moves to measure 5, the octatonic triad moves from A flat to D, a transposition of a tritone. Thus, there are 6 common tones between the A flat octatonic triad and the D octatonic triad. The remainder of the octatonic triads in the first 10 measures of the piece are B flat in measure 7, E in measure 8, and C in measures 9 through 10. Thus, the intervals by which the octatonic triad is transposed through the first 10 measures are minor sixth, tritone, minor sixth, tritone, minor sixth. The roots are C, A flat, D, B flat, E, C, a circular progression that starts and ends with C. There is a noticeable aural analog to the interval of transposition. Because of the fewer number of common tones, the transpositions by minor sixth in this opening section are more striking to the ear, while the transpositions by tritone are more subtle. Scriabin exploits this effect in his use of dynamics at the points of interchange between the chords. When a chord is transposed by minor sixth, he writes a crescendo. When a chord is transposed by tritone, he writes a decrescendo. 2 more facts in these opening measures are significant. First, the roots of each of the octatonic triads are always voiced as the lowest notes. This makes the triadic construction easy to decipher. Second, the trumpet-like melody above the chords is exceedingly simple, and more importantly, it consists entirely of chord tones. Here, A, D flat, and E belong to the C octatonic triad of the first 2 measures, while the F belongs to the A flat octatonic triad of the next 2 measures. The melody is perfectly fitted to its harmonic context, and the harmonic context is perfectly fitted to the melody. The transitional section at measures 12 through 16 displays 4 octatonic triads related through an octatonic superset. The C octatonic triad appears in the left hand, supporting a shifting pattern of chords in the right hand. In measure 14, the first chord in the right hand is made up of the last 4 pitches of the C octatonic triad. The second chord is a minor third lower, though, and therefore has one note, D sharp, which does not fit with the C octatonic triad. In order to understand this chord properly, it is necessary to move its implied root a minor third lower as well and consider it as the last 4 notes of the A octatonic triad. The same process can be repeated for the third and fourth chords. The notes of the third chord are the last 4 notes of the F sharp octatonic triad, and the notes of the fourth chord are the last 4 notes of the E flat octatonic triad. Altogether, these 4 chords create an octatonic superset. They are not spelled, though, as if they are parts of the same octatonic superset, but rather as parts of 4 different triadic constructions with roots a minor third apart. While transpositions of the octatonic triad by minor third, tritone, or major sixth all yield 6 common tones, transposition by tritone has an especially important place in the 7th sonata. This is because the tritone between the root and raised 11th of the octatonic chord, when transposed by tritone, and harmonically yields the same notes in reverse order. For example, the C octatonic triad has a tritone between the C and F sharp, while the F sharp octatonic triad has a tritone between the F sharp and B sharp. Though the C has been respelled as B sharp in the second chord, the notes of the tritone in the first chord, C and F sharp, are the same as the notes of the tritone in the second chord, F sharp and B sharp. While this kind of transposition permeates the entire sonata, one place where it is particularly evident is in measures 47 through 50. In measure 47, the root of the octatonic triad, present as the bottom note of the left hand, is F. In the second half of measure 48, though, the triad is transposed a tritone away to B. However, the lowest notes in the left hand are still the same pitches and harmonically as the lowest notes of the previous chord. The only difference is that the F has been respelled enharmonically as E sharp in order to fit within the B octatonic triad. The transposition principle is present at deeper levels of the sonata as well. The C octatonic triad of the opening measures acts as the primary key area. The opening 9 measures, with their transpositions away from and back to the C octatonic triad, are a prolongation of this primary key area. In measures 17 through 28, the music moves away from the C octatonic triad to a G sharp octatonic triad, which is the secondary key area for the remainder of the exposition. Because the C octatonic triad and the G sharp octatonic triad share only 3 common tones, the latter is sufficiently distinct from the former to be able to serve as a secondary key area. After the development section, the recapitulation follows a similar pattern of presentation as the exposition. The difference is that the primary and secondary key areas of the recapitulation are a whole step lower than the exposition. Now the primary key area is B flat, and the secondary key area is F sharp. While the secondary key area of the recapitulation is still a transposition of a minor sixth of the primary key area of the recapitulation, it is a transposition of a tritone of the primary key area of the exposition. It is therefore in close proximity to the primary key area of the exposition, since the 2 key areas share 6 common tones. The second type of harmonic movement in the 7th sonata is the oscillation between the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad. These 2 triads are nearly identical. The only difference between a C octatonic triad and a C acoustic triad is that the first chord has D flat and the second chord has D natural. This small difference, though, accounts for both a sonic difference between the 2 chords, the second sounds more stable, and an important melodic possibility in which the lowered ninth can move to the natural ninth and vice versa. This harmonic operation is introduced with the second theme in measures 29 through 35. Here the root of both the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad is G sharp. The melodic and harmonic difference between the 2 chords is the A natural in the octatonic triad and the A sharp in the acoustic triad. The interchange between these two pitches is seen in the melody. An A natural appears in measure 29, which is then raised to A sharp in measure 30. The A sharp also appears in the left hand as part of the harmony in measure 30. It is then lowered to the A natural in measure 31. In terms of importance, A and A sharp are equals. One note is not auxiliary to the other. Harmonic and melodic motion can move in either direction, from A to A sharp, or from A sharp to A. Measures 33 through 34 further expand the chromatic possibilities of the oscillation principle. As the chords change between the G-sharp acoustic triad and the G-sharp octatonic triad, three kinds of chromatic movement can be detected. The first is from A sharp to A natural, the second is from D sharp to C double sharp, and the third is from E sharp to F sharp. These subtle chromatic shifts between the chords make the sonic differences between them even more apparent. The interplay between the transposition principle and the oscillation principle is evident in the large-scale structure of the sonata. Phrases or large sections are based primarily on either the transposition principle or the oscillation principle. Because oscillation takes place between an octatonic triad and an acoustic triad with the same root, sections based on the oscillation principle maintain the same root for longer periods. This makes the harmonic and melodic movement between the lowered ninth and the natural ninth easy to hear. In the development, for example, measures 81 through 87 maintain the same root, B flat, for 7 measures, while the melody oscillates between C flat and C natural, and the harmony oscillates between the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad. On the other hand, sections based on the transposition principle avoid the acoustic triad, since no root is settled on long enough to allow for an interchange between the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad. Measures 60 through 65, for example, transpose the octatonic triad 5 times in the space of 6 measures. There is no time for the acoustic triad to oscillate with any of the octatonic triads. There are places where the oscillation principle and the transposition principle occur within the same phrase. Measure 69 through 72 is an example, but these are rare. Finally, it is interesting to note that while the piece began with a C octatonic triad, it ends with an F-sharp acoustic triad. Not only has the original triad been transposed to its tritone opposite at F-sharp by the end of the piece, but it has also oscillated to the acoustic triad. Thus, the principles of transposition and oscillation are at work at the very deepest level of the piece. There are several places in the Seventh Sonata that hint at the direction Scriabin would take in his later works. One such place is measures 97 through 102. Here, the secondary theme is present as the harmony oscillates between the B octatonic triad and the B acoustic triad. A curious chord emerges in measure 99, however, when an E natural appears in the left hand along with the other notes of the B acoustic triad. Since the B acoustic triad has a raised 11th, E sharp, the E natural appears to be out of place. In fact, Scriabin is expanding the possibilities of the triad by allowing the 11th of the chord to be simultaneously natural and raised. This principle can theoretically be applied to other members of the chord. The same B acoustic triad, for example, might simultaneously allow a natural third, D sharp, and a lowered third, D natural. Another expansion of Scriabin's system might allow more possibilities for oscillation. This is explored in measures 297 and 298 of the Seventh Sonata. Here the first chord is an F-sharp octatonic triad. As the D-sharp melody note moves to D natural, the harmony changes slightly to an F-sharp, A-sharp, C-sharp, E, G, B-sharp, D natural chord. This latter chord is a new construction, neither an octatonic chord nor an acoustic chord. Allowing more possibilities for oscillation therefore creates more possibilities for different kinds of harmonies. Scriabin also occasionally explores the possibility of chord inversions in the Seventh Sonata. Here, the underlying harmony is the C acoustic triad. However, the chord on beat 1 is an inversion of this triad with E on the bottom. While most of the chords in the Seventh Sonata are in root position, Scriabin would experiment further with triadic inversions in his later works. Finally, it is possible that the root of the chord may not be present at all. This can be seen in measure 300, where the notes are G, B flat, D, F sharp. These four notes can be placed in the context of a C acoustic triad. However, the root of the chord C is absent. This allows the notes that are present to stand alone as a separate harmony. While they derive their existence from the C acoustic triad, they become an autonomous chord in the absence of their original root. Scriabin explored the possibilities of these derived chords in the works that followed the Seventh Sonata. Scriabin's Seventh Sonata represents an important step in the composer's development. In it, he does away with the dichotomy of chord tones versus non-chord tones, replacing it with a system in which all notes can be harmonized through either transposition of the octatonic triad or oscillation between the octatonic triad and the acoustic triad. This strict control over harmonic parameters has implications at both the foreground and background levels of the piece. At the same time, these strict limitations set constraints on the harmonic and melodic possibilities in Scriabin's system that he would try to break free from in his subsequent works.